Viewers, you are watching the Policy Times, India's channel on public policy and foreign affairs. And today we are here at the Embassy of Argentina in New Delhi. And there are two big developments we saw in the world, at the world stage, at the world level, at the global level basically. And one is the trade war that is happening between China and America. The other is recently the world has concluded the G20 summit, which is a global event combining world 20 top leaders coming in a single stage and dealing with the world's top issues. We have the ambassador of Republic of Argentina with us. Excellency, thank you so much and welcome.
No, thank you very much, and thank you to your viewers for this time you're giving me. Let me tell you that the two different questions are very much linked, so it's very difficult to talk of one without mentioning the other. I think that this weekend has been able to demonstrate us the positive use of G20 and the possible effects it can have in world governance. Why this? Because it gave the opportunity of a lot of side meetings, as the one that took place between US and China, the one that took place between US and India, and many other meetings.
Right.
And that gave the opportunity of a lot of declarations from Mr. Trump saying that the meeting was very good with China, so they expected good results, so that brought some calms to the markets. Same happened with India. With India in particular, if you take into account the visit of Secretary Pompeo 2 days prior to the G20 summit. So this is one of the main effects that G20 has, and it's the possibility of the leaders of these 20 countries getting together and having the opportunity of discuss among themselves in a very broad scene how these measures might affect or not, and gives them the possibility of debating it very clearly. Another consequence of this is Mr. Trump was in Japan, and just with the exchange of Twitters, he landed in North Korea. For the first time, a president of the US has been in North Korea. So, these are the kind of consequences. As I've been saying in some other opportunities, G20, it's not an implementation agency. It's just a platform in which the leaders meet to go ahead in the macroeconomic stability and in discussing the main political issues that are around.
Right.
In this regard, let me tell you that we are very happy with the results in the area of trade. We think that the Japanese presidency have done a very good job in terms of the discussions that were held and that were brought to the summit itself.
Right.
It's for the first time that we are talking about subsidies in agriculture, which, as you know, for us, it's a very important issue. So the fact that that's being put on the table and being considered, for us, it's quite important. Same happens with all the reforms in the WTO, in which we are going to be working very closely among our countries just to strengthen the cooperation in the field of the trade of goods. And other issue that it's very important for us in this same area is the mentioning of subsidies in the area of fisheries, because this is something new, and all this mentioning of an open market economy and an open market world, and the possibility of talking about subsidies, that gives us the hope that this will be a new starting point for these past months in which a lot of us feared on the possibility of increasing protectionism, trade wars, and the consequences of all those issues. In the question of WTO, let me tell you that also for the first time, and it's very important, there was a mentioning of the need of strengthening the dispute settlement mechanism.
Absolutely.
So these are very important issues that have been brought, and this is one area. There have been some other areas, and as we can expect, there was things about terrorism, about the money laundering, because although you may say that terrorism was not a chapter in itself, and it was dealt in the chapter of e-economy, I believe that the importance that has is that you preserve discussing the issue of terrorism, and you also put there, you stress the e-dimension of terrorism also, and how transactions through the internet, money laundering through internet, and and some other cyber attacks and some other cyber developments are also very important for terrorists. So in a balance, without going into too much of deepening on my answer, I think that the balance is very positive. We are quite happy with that.
Okay. Excellency, you have raised a lot of issues in your first, in fact you have answered a lot of, mentioned a lot of issues. I just want to quickly have your comment on each of, some of the important ones. For example, just before the G20 summit, we saw Japan going to Iran for the first time after the Islamic Revolution. Similarly, Trump goes to North Korea. These are two very absurd and different development. How does the world views these two? So Japan's visit was very different because Japan imports 5% of the petrol from Iran, and the America kind of, the step or actions they're going to take against Iran is very different.
I cannot tell you what the world thinks about this. I can tell you what I think.
What Argentina,
at least what we think about this. And in this regard, that was a very interesting visit. But I believe that this is part of a view that you have to have on this area of the world, where a lot of things are going on. And geopolitically, there are a lot of developments in the area that you have to take into account for a peaceful development of the region. The situation between the US and Iran is somehow very dangerous. So they have been, very tough declarations on one side or the other that might rise the tension between the two countries.
It's at the highest level of tension possible.
And at the same time, you have a lot of Asian countries that are depending on the imports of Iranian oil. And with the sanctions being imposed by the US, you are in a big difficulty.
Right.
Because if you are to fulfill the sanctions of the US, you need alternative sources for that oil. The idea of what the US, what they are saying, or at least what we can read from what they are saying, is that those economic sanctions are putting a lot of pressure on them, and they see them as positive. That's an evaluation that from here I cannot do. I need more elements than what I have. But anyhow, yes, it is a problem. You have all these countries having to shift their imports to other countries. Also Venezuela, which is also a source for India, it's showing problems, and it's showing problems for the US. So every effort being done, and I want to put the visit of Japan to Iran in that context. I think that every action that is oriented to lower the tension in the area is a good action. So let me think then that's what the Japanese try to do, and let's hope that it has positive effects.
Excellency, the major, whether it is G20 issues or whether it is trade war, the main person behind, the main actor behind this entire movie is Donald Trump, because his actions, his sudden statements, Twitter statements, has been creating some or giving a new direction to the American leadership on global issues. Now, in that context, how much it is actually going to impact, or it is impacting the global issues in the trade war? So I want to couple that with this trade war and the protectionism issue, and how Argentina is being affected. That the Japan Investment Bank recently said that the countries, that some countries would be benefiting from the trade war happening between US and China. For example, Vietnam would be benefiting, Chile, and then Argentina. Even Indian thinkers are also observing that how much can India benefit from the trade war which is happening. How do you observe trade war, and how do you see this Trump's leadership changing things?
Look, let me tell you that any trade war brings tension. You can benefit, or some countries can benefit from specific measures. No, let's say that a country X impose higher tariffs on country Z, and there will be a possibility for country B to just get his products over there. But that's not positive, because it's done in a world that it's under a lot of pressure and a lot of tension. And that is never positive. And that, in the case of Argentina, for the time being, and I would not say, I cannot measure this in the future, but for the time being, the main effect that we have had of the trade war is a negative one, because prices of some of our main exports have been coming down. So as far as we are concerned, in our exports, we have lost a lot of money due to that trade war in which we are not involved.
Right.
That may be compensated, as you say, by some other product, maybe, but it's so uncertain.
So maybe the American protectionism is actually costing you.
Well, the trade war,
right?
Well, because it's very difficult to separate American protectionism with the trade war. It's part of the same.
It's part of the same.
It's part of, for me. It's part of the same game. One side of the game is the war itself. The other side of the game is that, in fact, what Trump has been pursuing since he arrived to the presidency is to that protectionism that will benefit what he thinks have been unfair trade deals from the whole world with the U.S.
Absolutely. That's what it's costing Argentina so far.
So far, for us, the balance is negative.
Right. So when the Argentina president came to G20, then he had a couple of agenda for some bilateral meets, and he wanted to achieve certain goals. For example, one goal was meeting the EU Council President to finalize the EU-Mercosur deal, FTA. The other was meeting the Chinese counterpart to conclude a Atucha 3 nuclear plant. And then he also wanted to meet Trump to deal with the trade barriers issue and terrorism and all. What has been the progress from Argentina's side from the G20?
Well, let me tell you that we still don't have the information about the private meetings that the president had, and that will take a few days for us to receive here the information. There is one that, yes, I want to stress, and that is that at the same time the G20 was taking place, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, with a huge delegation from Argentina and from the Mercosur countries, they were negotiating in Brussels, and the same day, on Saturday, they were able to finalize the agreement between Mercosur, an FTA agreement between Mercosur and the European Union that took us 20 years to negotiate. So that was a great day in terms of what happened trade-wise, and I believe that that reflects a little bit which were the worries of our president expressed, as you said, in the G20, and I think that part of them have been cleared, and I think that with the declarations, although I don't know what happened between our leaders, but yes, what has transpired is that the declarations between India and China are a positive sign in terms of how the trade war can develop.
Okay. So the last and final question I want to ask, Excellency, you said in the beginning itself that G20 is not an implementation platform. It's basically a bilateral interaction meeting and all, raising the global issues. Now, again, so every question has a two dimension in it. First is the declaration said that except US, the world agreed for the climate change. Except US means it's almost a failure. That is what we as observers we feel, that if US doesn't have the leadership in any particular issue, it is quite difficult to actually execute on the ground. That is one. Secondly, if G20 is not an implementation body, the biggest question is only some statements doesn't make change on the ground. Then who are the implementation agencies should be responsible to take those deals forward and implement them?
Well, there are 100 questions in what you have said, and I'll try to go one by one. When we had the presidency, the main theme of our presidency was the issue of consensus.
Right.
Because I think that it's much more positive trying to achieve a consensus than having that kind of declaration, all minus one or whatever, however you want to put it.
Right.
Of course, it is very important to have the US on board in the question of climate change. But if US doesn't want to be on board on climate change, the whole world, the rest of the world, has to take measures, because we also have opportunities of having actions on our sides that can benefit the climate change. So yes, it's a pity that they are not on board, but that has not to be an excuse for the rest not to do what they have to do.
True.
So that, yes, it's a pity, it's not good, but don't protect ourselves saying if the US is not doing it, I will not do it. We have responsibilities and under the Paris Treaty that we have to fulfill, all of us, and there are mechanisms that we can apply without the US, and we have to apply them. And I think that with the time, as time passes by, we have to do coordination work with them so as to have them on board. Because these are global issues that require global responses. Finish with that. I said that G20 is not an implementation agency, and I said it on purpose because people cannot expect that after a G20 meeting, things happen immediately, because we don't have that capacity of implementing.
Right.
But the countries do have the capacity of implementing the measures themselves in their policies and through the international organizations that are the ones that are responsible for applying those kind of measures.
Right.
What you decide in G20 has to be a guiding point for organizations like the UN, like WTO, like all the implementing organizations to go ahead. But the countries don't finish their work at the time they take the decision in G20. After that, you have to go to the organizations and push the solutions there.
Right.
But having 20 leaders that they do agree in certain issues is a whole of an advance.
Right. I want to ask a few more questions, but we are short of time, and I don't want to. Maybe we can do this in coming separate episodes. So, without American leadership, most of the international institutions are almost becoming ineffective, defunct. For example, WTO. If America doesn't give proper leadership to this, agri subsidies and all issues, America is blocking it. And if America doesn't agree, then emerging countries, including Argentina and all, they cannot come to a conclusion where a trade deal can happen actually.
Well, it's very important when you have such an influence of a country like the US,
Right.
you need to have their leadership also. That's,
Global.
but also you have to see the scene in all those organizations. And what we have to be also recognizing is that some of them need adjournment.
Adjournment.
Because, you know, a lot of them come from the reality of the 50s, of the 40s.
Exactly. That's a
And
very
nowadays-
interesting dimension actually.
The world have changed. What we have to understand also is that those changes in the international scene has to be reflected in the governance structure of the organizations. So
That's an excellent observation. So, I mean, you were suggesting, Excellency, that now these international institutions, so far last 50 years, they are functioning like World Bank, IMF, WTO. Now, time has come now to revamp them or create new institutions with new agenda
look, I think that
current world is facing.
I don't want to say that you have to just do a blank and bring all new. No, and some institutions have been able to process this change.
That's a amazing.
Some of them have done. They were able to do it. So it's not that everything is not working.
Right.
There are some that you need to strengthen their capacity and reflect the. When you talk about WTO, and I had the opportunity of being in GATT, the predecessor of the WTO, long time ago. In 20 years, the scenario in the world trade have changed dramatically. You know, members of WTO are double of what were members of GATT.
True.
At that time, you just have goods. Now you have services, you have intellectual property, you have agriculture that even we have not been able to, a full integration of agriculture in the agenda of WTO, but at least you are discussing it. So there are a lot of things that these organizations have to, sometimes
Innovate.
the method of doing it, it's not the correct one. Sometimes people go for changes that the world is not ready to take them all at once. But it's clear that there is a need to strengthen the functioning. It's clear that we need multilateralism.
Absolutely.
And this is something for what we have to fight for.
Right. Excellent. So we had the ambassador of Argentina, and as the Excellency very nicely actually summarized in his own last question. Firstly, G20 and trade wars. These are two. These were very important phenomena in the recent past in the global affairs. G20 went off very well. Trade war, it was observed that trade war would impact a lot in the G20 negotiations. It did impact a couple of in certain ways. Now we wanted to have the observation, so we have been observing it from the Indian point of view. From the Excellency, we had an observation from the Argentina point of view or Latin American part of point of view, that how they have been observing G20 and trade war. So as Excellency also said that there is now a need of revamping the existing international organizations. And we have to also remember, I personally have been working on behind for the business level at the G20's Excellency, and I have seen G20 is just a political meeting and commitment platform. It is not an implementation body. Now, unless there is a sure implementation body of any agenda that is set at the global level, most of these developments remain on paper. They don't actually actualize on the ground. So we would like to have more clarity on the implementation aspect of the G20 commitments that we often see. But Excellency's last point was extremely clear. So the biggest development for Argentina, on behalf of Argentina, was that EU-Mercosur free trade agreement, which took 20 years, is now finally come to an conclusion. So thank you, viewers. Keep watching the Policy Times.